talked about the deficit between what was budgeted and what came in on apportionments. We have talked about that. We have focused on that. CFA thought maybe there's another way to do this. Maybe there's a way we could look at this and do this differently. And they received a lot of help from a person named Paul Durdak, who is an ordained elder of the Cal Nevada Conference. He's now retired. Former UMCOR director, worked for the Board of Pensions for a number of years, and just happens to live here in Santa Fe and attend this church. I met Paul the first time I came up here to do a church conference, and I met Paul, and then when the time was right, I made sure Paul met Dan Boyd and Kathy Anderson, and we kind of started down this path. When we in local churches, we ask of our church members, some of the times we ask them to consider the tithe, 10%. That always worked well for me because I just had to move a decimal lower. That was great. I didn't have to think too hard. And that's kind of the standard we talk about of giving is the tithe. So the question came up: why is it that we have some churches to give 17% of their annual budget, or 22%, or 8% in our annual conference? Why are we doing that to start with? And what does it mean that we always have a deficit? So instead of looking at it always from the expense side, Paul helped CFA start looking at things from the income side. And if you look at what our income is, and you take on those year-end statistical tables we have to do, always by January 30th, 10th, 19th, 8th, 15th, by January 15th, because we all have a win on that day. That doesn't surprise me. Line 62 in that is what was the church's total operational income, or income for operations over the year. When you take every church in our annual conference and you add them all up, it's 30 million plus. 10% of that is what our conference operates on. Year after year after year, that's basically the amount we operate on, is 10% of that amount. So why don't we change the equation? Instead of the unfair apportionment, apportionments are intended to be fair. The difficulty is that over time, they get skewed. And that's why you have some churches that are paying larger percent of their budget than others. So why don't we even that and focus on the income aspect? And so there are lots of discussion about this, believe me, over several meetings. But the proposal is basically to move to that model beginning in 2016, that churches what they would remit to the annual conference is based on what they receive. It's not based on what the conference says you're supposed to give. That by itself, I don't know about you, makes me feel better. Having pastored churches before. Based on what we receive, we're going to give this much. Now let me tell you the percentages of that, and then I'll have Kathy come and share with you the remittance form to give you a practical hands-on, this is what it means in my local church kind of thing. When you take the Board of Pension piece, remember there was a line for Board of Pensions, and that was unforgivable. Our conference voted years ago. That's an unforgivable, so you're always going to owe that. If you don't pay it this year, you still owe it. When you take that amount and you spread it out, it comes out to be about 2% of the church's budget on an annual basis. Some a little higher, some a little lower, but around 2%. So if you take that and then we ask churches, okay, at the end of the month, when you look at your income, ordinary income, which I'll let Kathy answer that in a minute, send the conference 8% of it. So the roughly 2% for pensions, 8%, you're at a tithe, which makes it fair for everyone. It's some aren't going to pay a higher percentage, and some a lower percentage. You're all paying the same percentage. And then the budget that CFNA will submit will be under the amount of anticipated income. Instead of being 3.6 million, when we anticipate 2.8 or whatever it is, we're going to say the budget is going to be based on our anticipated income. So that's kind of some of the big idea and the background information. Kathy, why don't you hand out those remittance forms? Let Kathy walk you through that. This is going to be kind of a hands-on way to look at how this works. You will still be able to do second mile giving this way. I mean, if you take a special, if there's a disaster in Oklahoma when they have the next tornado, and your church takes an offering, you can still do second mile giving this way. But part of the definition that you have to pay attention to is the ordinary income. And if you've been reading the Tithing Times, then you probably have some idea about that.